Hi everyone, Aish here, and on today's video, I want to talk to you about the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Mini and just kind of share my opinions on it and talk about what we do know about them. Now, the prices just got announced along with all of the specs, and for the Retroid Pocket Mini, we're looking at $199, and for the 5, we're looking at $219, which I think these are pretty fair prices considering what we're getting. And there is going to be a discount as well. If you're an early bird, you can get the Retroid Pocket 5 for $199, or if you pre-order, you're going to get it for $209. For the Mini, it's $189 and $194. Now, I think most users, or most adopters I should say, are going to be looking at the retail prices because unfortunately with Retroid, there's been some issues with the first batch of products. Now, to their credit, they've been really good about keeping up with those things and actually making it right with the consumers for the most part. Like with the triggers, they immediately came out and said, hey, if you have a trigger issue, we're going to be giving you a new backplate. So just swap that out. With the screens on the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, they immediately, even before the product was out, said, hey, we're already working on a software fix for this. And they did. And for users, the screen really wasn't an issue. There was some other issues that people reported, like ghostings and things like that, but I can't personally speak to those because I actually didn't have those issues with my device, and I see kind of a mixed response with that. Some users had it, some users didn't, so I really won't get too much into those. Let's just say that I feel like most users are going to be paying a retail price for these, not really those earlier prices. Now, with that being said, I still think those prices are pretty fair considering what they're doing here. It's only going to be a minor bump from what the Pro was costing, about $19, but you're getting a bigger, much better screen, which was a complaint in the original Retro Pocket 4 Pro, that the screen was a little too small, and you're getting new ergonomics plus a new layout. Now, they switched the buttons around, so we're finally getting buttons on the top next to the D-pad and the face buttons, which I prefer that layout. Same thing for the Mini. Now, just to make things clear here, I'm going to be referring to a 5 a lot because that's the one I'm the most excited for, but a lot of these things are going to apply to the Mini, and I will kind of circle back to that Mini here in a little bit. Now, looking at the specs, we're getting a 5000 milliamp battery, we're getting a Snapdragon 865 in it, we're getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage, which the battery size, I really wish it was a little bit bigger because one of my issues with the Retro Pocket 4 Pro was that if you're getting into higher end emulation, that battery can go a little bit fast for a smaller device that you're supposed to be able to carry around with you. Now, the 865, as far as battery use, is pretty similar to the D1100, at least in benchmarking goes, so I don't think that's going to improve that much. However, if you were playing lower end games, the battery life was really good. This is more of that higher end type of emulation that I'm talking about here. The other big change is now they're actually dropping the RAM to 6 gigs of RAM, and that is a little bit unfortunate because for things like GameCube and PlayStation 2, if you wanted to use HD textures, when I tested them out on the Retro Pocket 4 the 4 Pro with 8 gigs of RAM, I was getting about 60 to 80% RAM usage using those. So if you're looking at that 80%, that's going to put you just above 6 gigs of RAM, so HD textures might be a little bit of an issue here with certain games. Now, the game I'm referring to right now is with Wind Waker when I was using it. So we'll have to see how that goes, and hopefully that is a change that Retroid can make and just bump that up to 8 gigs of RAM, because I think that's just going to be better for just general usability, especially with Android. Most devices now are getting 8 gigs of RAM, so let's match that. Another unfortunate thing here is that they're using Android 10, and I really wish they were able to bump that up. Now, I imagine this is an issue with the chip being a little bit older. Maybe there isn't official support for it. And I saw that they were talking to Gamma about potentially working on something. Now, I don't know if this is going to be an official collaboration or not, but it is good to see that Gamma is interested in this device and is likely going to work on it, because getting a newer version of Android with Lineage would be very helpful for Switch emulation, because Yuzu, which, yeah, Yuzu, I mean, everybody's going to use Yuzu, so let's just not beat around the bush with that one. Doesn't work with Android 10. You would have to use a separate version of Yuzu that, from last time I checked, doesn't have the same compatibility. So that could be a little bit of an issue there, but hopefully that does get fixed. At this point, nothing is set in stone, so keep that in mind. Things are likely to change, and we've seen Retro already make modifications. They were talking about some different colors that the community wasn't too crazy about, so they came back and just kind of redid them, and things look much better right now. Which, speaking of colors, that GameCube one looks awesome, and unfortunately, if I pick one up, I'm probably just gonna go with the all black version. I just kind of like the slick look of it, but that GameCube one does look really good. Other than that, we're looking at pretty similar things. The Mini has a 3.7-inch screen, which is kind of the biggest turnoff for me. I know from the 2S, a lot of people really love that device, but having a smaller 3.5-inch screen kind of kept me from really enjoying it. And I kind of feel that if I go for the Mini, I'm gonna have a similar experience. So that's why I'm kind of more focused on the Retroid Pocket 5 versus that one. I still think this is going to be pretty cool for a lot of users, especially people that are very enthusiastic about a smaller device and having that 4:3 native screen. Now, those are the major differences in my opinion as far as the specs go. They also make some changes to the ergonomics of it, which for me, it just kind of looks like a smaller Odin. So this is kind of like the Odin Lite that AYN didn't give us. This time around, Retroid is giving that to us with a less powerful Snapdragon chip, but very similar ergonomics. Thankfully, they kept the D-pad on top, which I'm a huge fan of. That's where I prefer the D-pad to be. So, Retroid, never change. You're doing me a solid with this one. Now, the biggest change that they're doing here, or addition, I should say, it's not really a change, is they're adding Linux support, which is pretty big for a lot of people. Now, me personally, I'm an Android fanboy, so it doesn't make that big of a difference to me. But it is exciting that we are opening the door up to a more powerful Linux handheld alternative, which we really haven't had a good one. We could have had one with something like the GameForce Ace, which had a 3588 in it, which would have made it the most powerful Linux handheld. But unfortunately, the support wasn't really there, and I don't think nothing's going to happen with that anymore. So having official support on the X65 is pretty cool for Linux enthusiasts. That also is going to open the door for ports that aren't available on Android but are on Linux. So if you are somebody that wants to dual boot, that could be pretty cool. Now, I wouldn't get my hopes up about this opening up the doors for Xbox emulation and for Steam indie games and all that, because we are still dealing with 6 gigs of RAM, which if you've ever tried to boot Steam on ARM Linux, you know it can be pretty resource intensive and it might not be the best experience. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible or things couldn't get better. I'm just saying as of right now, that shouldn't be a feature that you're super excited about, because potentially it might not be as good as you get your hopes up to be. So just look at that as a bonus. Don't expect for that one. Now, for other things like getting Batocera on there, yeah, it's going to be really good if you don't want to deal with Emulation Station on Android and you just kind of want that nice interface and kind of having everything already done for you so you can just boot your games up. That is going to be great to see. Now, Retroid does do a pretty good job with their launchers. So for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other people that do like Android, this isn't that big of a selling point. But again, some really cool things could happen here, so I am keeping my eye on it. Unfortunately for ARM Linux, unless things have changed since last time, there are some issues with Vulkan support for PS2, so that's not going to be as good as it could have been. And from what I understand, a lot of distributions just aren't supporting Switch emulation on their front ends anyway, so you might have to do some workarounds there. Still, pretty cool that it's there. I know I sound like I'm kind of being negative on it, but I'm not. I'm just trying to be realistic with the expectations that, hey, this isn't going to be the better alternative. In my opinion, Android is still going to be the better alternative. For performance, jumping from the D1100 to the 865, for the majority of things, I don't think there's going to be that big of a gap. So if you just ordered your Retroid Pocket 4 Pro and now you're a little bit upset because this is coming, I wouldn't worry too much because I don't think you're going to be missing out on that much. If you actually look at the specs for the D1100 and the 865, there's a few tests where the CPU comes out on top, and emulation is very CPU dependent. They're both pretty even chips, so you're not likely to see a huge difference in the majority of systems. Where things could change is for emulators that take advantage of the turn-up drivers like 3DS and Switch, but like I already said, Android 10 is going to be limiting how much we can do with Switch, so until that changes, realistically, you're going to be looking at the benefits for 3DS emulation. Now, potentially for WinLater 2, so that is another thing to look at, where if you're an enthusiast for Windows emulation on Android, you might see improved performance going with the Snapdragon chip. So again, these are all things that we'll have to see, because from what we have right now, it's mostly just stock 865 chips without active cooling, and Retroid usually does a pretty good job of optimizing things for more of a gaming device. Now, we will have to wait to see the actual performance difference between the D1100 and the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro and the 865 and the 5, because Retroid does a really good job of optimizing things to get them to run as best as they can. And right now, every test we have is kind of based on phones running the 865, which usually aren't going to be overclocked and they're not going to be actively cooled. And that is going to play a pretty big role there. But generally, it's not really going to be a generational leap. It's just going to kind of be an improvement on things, which for a handheld of this price just makes sense, which I think they're doing a great job of giving you the best possible device at this price range and trying to make it feel a little bit more premium than what we've seen so far from them. So up to this point, I know it kind of seems like I'm not too high on the Retroid Pocket 5 or the Mini, but the reality is that I am kind of excited for them. I'm going to be honest with you. At first, when I first saw them, I was just kind of meh on them, you know? But the more I look at them, the more I see that there's a lot of potential here, as long as Retroid can address some of the concerns. The lower RAM, the use of Android 10 will be the biggest ones for me. I'm pretty sure the screens are going to be great because we've seen other devices with this 1080p AMOLED screen and they always look fantastic, and I don't think there's going to be any issues there. But those two other issues could be deal breakers for a lot of people that are looking for this to be kind of like their one and done device, which it potentially could be for a lot of users. Now, that being said, those are my concerns, but there are upsides. Now, it looks great. It's a bigger screen. It's a new kind of form factor, which looks to be a little bit more comfortable. And I'm sure Retroid is going to do a great job with the software. It looks like they're excited for it. It looks like they're getting support from other people. And it's awesome to see them open things up for other developers to come in and say like, hey, you want to put Linux on this? Put Linux on it. We'll work with you. So that is pretty awesome. But I think I've kind of rambled on enough at this point. This is just supposed to be a quick little video sharing my thoughts on it. Please let me know if you like this type of video. I've been playing around with the idea of starting this Let's Talk series, just kind of picking a topic, or maybe even doing like a weekly or every 2 weekly roundup where I just kind of sit here and I throw all of my opinions about all this stuff that's happening. So let me know what you think. Please leave a comment down below if you like this kind of content. I will definitely make more of it. And if you can, subscribe to the channel. It's a growing channel. It's a small channel, but I want to see this get pretty big so I can do more of this type of stuff for you. Thanks for hanging out. I hope I didn't ramble too much. Have an awesome day. And don't forget to leave your opinions in the comments down below.